This episode is brought to you by HOCl. Liquid is clearly better. Liquid chlorine is the highest purity, works immediately, has no added cyanuric acid or calcium, and it will leave your pool safe, clean, and clear. And by the bottom feeder professional grade battery powered vacuum system. It sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off with code DVB100.
This episode is brought to you by Skimmer, the #1 pool service software in North America. With Skimmer, you can streamline your schedule, grow your revenue, and keep your customers coming back with 5-star service. Whether you're a one-person operation or an established team, Skimmer is your partner in success. Visit getskimmer.com/poolguy to try Skimmer for free for 30 days.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to do a Best of Bob Lowry, and we're going to do part 1 of 2 of some rookie chemistry mistakes you can make if you're learning how to do pool service or if you're taking care of your pool. These are some mistakes you can make with chemistry, and it may not be completely obvious, and Bob Lowry is going to unpack some of these common mistakes in part 1 here. Are you a pool service pro looking to take your business to the next level? Join the Pool Guy Coaching Program. Get expert advice, business tips, exclusive content, and get direct support from me. I'm a 35-year veteran in the industry. Whether you're starting out or scaling up, I've got the tools to help you succeed. Learn more at swimmingpoollearning.com. Let's talk about some rookie mistakes out there. Now, there's a lot of new people in the industry, or you may be an employee coming on to a pool company. And we'll go over some of the top mistakes I think people make in the industry when they first start. And I think number 1, and this is also happening even with the old school guys out there, is not understanding the effects of high cyanuric acid on chlorine. And then on the second part of that, how important the cyanuric acid and free chlorine ratios are. And it's something that a lot of people don't consider. And so they'll have a trichlor pool that has cyanuric acid of maybe 150 or 200, and they're getting algae in there every week, and the free chlorine levels at 5 or 6 parts per million, and they're scratching their head thinking, hey, there's tons of chlorine in here, why am I still getting algae in this pool? So you want to go over kind of this misunderstanding that happens out there?
Yeah, for years we used to just put in 2 to 4 parts per million of chlorine in the pool, and that was supposed to be enough. And then every summer we all battled algae and put in algicides and superchlorinate and shock once a week and all those kinds of things. And we were doing stuff weekly to bring the chlorine level up to where it would kill the algae. We started figuring out what the problem is. And about 8 or 9 years ago, I spent a few hundred hours studying what's going on in the pool. And the good news is that because I'm independently wealthy and independent, if I want to spend 200 hours doing something, I don't have a boss telling me I can't do that. So I studied it to find out what kills algae, how much chlorine we need. Depending on who you talk to, we need only between 0.3 and 0.5 parts per million of HOCl in the water. And some people disagree with the 0.03, but everybody would agree that 0.05 parts per million HOCl will kill algae. So if we know that, then we're able to calculate how much chlorine is in the water if we know how much cyanuric acid is in the water. So we started figuring out how much cyanuric acid, how much chlorine is in the water. And the fact of the matter is, even with only 30 parts per million of cyanuric acid in the water, 97% of all the chlorine that's in the pool is bound to cyanuric acid. It's attached to it. And it's not like it's not available, but it's not available right now. Only the 3% that is not bound to the cyanuric acid is available for killing anything. that is an equilibrium reaction, 97% and 3%. So if you use some of the 3%, some of the 97 will switch over so that 97 and 3% is maintained. But because we know that 3% of the chlorine is doing the work, we can multiply the 3% of the amount of chlorine that's in the pool and find out if we've got enough chlorine. So if you have, say, 2 parts per million of chlorine in the pool, if you multiply 2 parts per million of chlorine by 0.03%, okay, well, let me back up. You also may know that when chlorine is in water, the pH determines how much HOCl is made and how much OCl is made. And the OCl minus and the HOCl are at 7.5 pH is about 50%. So you got 50% HOCl and 50% OCl minus. So that means that only 1.5% of the chlorine that's in the water is going to kill anything. So if we take 2 parts per million and multiply it times 1.5%, we get 0.3 parts per million HOCl. And we said we needed 0.5. So if you're keeping the chlorine level at 2 parts per million in that pool, you don't have enough chlorine to keep algae from growing. And it is that simple. And if we put in 3 parts per million of chlorine in that pool, 1.5% of 3 is 0.45. That's not quite 0.5, but it's close. So 3 parts per million might actually work. It's maybe on the borderline. And if you multiply 4 parts per million times 1.5%, you have 0.06. And 0.06 will definitely kill algae. So what I claim in most of the things I write, 2 to 4 parts per million of chlorine that's recommended by PHTA may not always work. And don't believe that if your chlorine level is between 2 and 4, you're good. Because I just showed you that you could have 2 and not be good and 4 and be good. So if you're in between there, it doesn't mean you're okay. So instead of having to do the math that way, we reversed it and made it easier for you to calculate. And so the free chlorine level that you need in the pool needs to be 7.5% of the cyanuric acid level. And yes, that means if you got 100 parts per million of cyanuric acid in the water, you need 7.5 parts per million of free chlorine. It means that. But in comes EPA and says you shouldn't have more than 4 parts per million of chlorine in the pool. That's their rule. And actually, their rule actually never considered the fact that you would have cyanuric acid in the pool, because your exposure to chlorine is less with cyanuric acid than without it. For that same reason, only 3% of the chlorine is available. So you're not exposed to 4 parts per million of chlorine. You're only exposed to 3% of 4 parts per million of chlorine. So the thing that you can do to reduce the 7.5% is if you add borate to the pool at 50 parts per million, you can lower the 7.5% requirement to 5%. And that becomes a much more manageable and easy number. 5% of whatever your cyanuric acid is how much chlorine you need in the pool to prevent algae. And if it goes below that, then you run the chance of getting algae. And we've been teaching that for 3 years. I've written about it now for 8 years, and I've also got a book that most of you have probably heard of called Pool Chemistry for Service Pros. And it's a short book of 28 pages, but we recommend in there to keep the level of borate at 50 parts per million and chlorine level at 5% of that, of CYA. But that book has now been distributed to 13,000 service techs. And they're doing it, and it's working for them.
And the Pool Guy Podcast Show has teamed up with UPA to bring you affordable, reliable liability insurance starting at just $64 a month. Get up to $2 million in coverage, and the members of my coaching group get an even lower rate. Protect your business and your peace of mind. Sign up with UPA today by clicking the link in the podcast description. Yeah, and I would say from field testing and experience, if you want to keep your pool algae free, even with a high chlorine level, like I gave that example at the beginning, a 200 parts per million cyanuric acid pool, not unheard of in California, by the way,
No.
at 6 parts per million chlorine is not enough to keep the algae out, even with borates in there. So with the borates, you would need 10 parts per million. And so if the new guy is struggling with algae in pools and he thinks that, man, this chlorine level is off the charts, but I'm still getting algae, that's the reason, because they don't understand the formula that you just went over there in great detail, by the way, which I really appreciate that. I like the fact that you reversed it, because doing the math forward is difficult for anybody, and using that easy percentage backwards
Right.
is much better. And then another aspect is the LSI. Interesting, I was talking to Scott Hamilton over at United Chemical about his Hamilton index. And that's another index that you can actually use that one in California pretty effectively because of our high calcium hardness level. But the LSI is pretty much the standard of the industry across the country. And what about the pool guy that probably never heard of the LSI, never thought about it? What would be the problem with someone starting out their pool service business or working for someone and not even knowing what the LSI is? And the Pool Guy Podcast Show has teamed up with UPA to bring you affordable, reliable liability insurance starting at just $64 a month. Get up to $2 million in coverage, and the members of my coaching group get an even lower rate. Protect your business and your peace of mind. Sign up with UPA today by clicking the link in the podcast description.
It actually depends. If he got one of our books and started using targets, he probably wouldn't need the LSI. But if he just started doing pools and he's got all this mishmash of information, understand that the LSI is a method of predicting whether your pool is going to be scale forming, whether your pool water is going to be scale forming or corrosive, or what we say is balanced. And it's a method of predicting whether the water will be that way. And you measure, in the old days, we measured 5 things and plugged those test results into an equation and got the answer. And now with the advent of cyanuric acid and borate, we now have 7 things to check. We most of the time look up the 7 water tests. We look up a factor for each one of those test results and enter them into an equation. And the desired result is to come up with a 0.0 answer. And that means your water is perfectly balanced, neither scale forming nor corrosive. It is important if you're going to be maintaining the water to know if you're going to be forming scale or not. And there are various indices out there, and frankly, the Hamilton index is not an index. They call it an index, but it's not an index, and it pretty much does only work in California and Arizona. Most of the other country can't use it. Um, but and if you use the Hamilton index and use some numbers from his index and plug them into the LSI, you find that it's not balanced water. So I'm not a big fan of the Hamilton index, although it's been around for a long time, but just because it's been around doesn't mean it's a great index. But in any case, if you want to follow it, it's better than not doing anything. So I would suggest just using targets as we recommend for everything. And then you really don't need to be using any index. You just, everything is on target or it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't put it on target, you're going to have a problem.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think that's a good answer, because your target ranges, and the more and more I look at it, and I use this example with you. If you go into the bank and you tell a teller, I like to get $100 out, and she says, well, here's 80, it's within range of 100. You're going to walk out of the bank not quite as happy. And so the targets make a lot of sense, because you're talking about, $100,000, $200,000 investment in some people's backyards with their pool. And you have all these ranges. And you mentioned before in a different recording that if the LSIs could be perfectly balanced in those kind of ranges that people are using, 80 to 120 for alkalinity, right. pH of 7.4, yeah, and it may not even be balanced.
Well, you can balance the water so that you have a perfect LSI, but still not have a stable pool.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the problem. And you could balance the pool. For instance, if you had an alkalinity of 140, you could maybe use a pH of 7.2 with that, and have everything else in the normal ranges, and you'd have a balanced pool. But with an alkalinity of 140 and a pH of 7.2, that's only going to stay 7.2 for, maybe today.
Mm-hmm.
Tomorrow the pH is going to be 7.5 or 7.6 or 7.8. An alkalinity of 140 is going to raise that pH like crazy. So there's a difference between balancing the pool and making it stable. Yeah, and the goal is to make it stable so that from 1 week to the next or one visit to the next, nothing changes, or it changes just a little bit.
And if you're looking for other podcasts, you can go to my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. On the banner, there's a podcast icon. Click on that. There'll be a drop-down menu of other podcasts, 1,800 of them you can listen to at your leisure. And if you're interested in the coaching program, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. This episode is brought to you by HOCl, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.